Our verse today is 2 Samuel chapter 7 verse 2. The king said to Nathan the prophet, "See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, and the ark of God dwells in a tent." David had been fighting so many battles. Now he had conquered many places and God had given him victory. He can enjoy rest in his house. It is within this context that David realized that he was enjoying a big house and said to the prophet Nathan that he wanted to build a house for the Lord. Our verse says, the king said to Nathan the prophet. Why does the king need to tell the prophet Nathan that he wants to build a house? Could David have gone ahead and carry out his wish without a prophet? This is the first mention of Nathan, and he is the prophet instrumental in David's reign. A prophet, Navi in Hebrew, is the mouthpiece of God. The prophet speaks on behalf of God. David knew and recognized the importance of prophecy and disclosed his intention to prophet Nathan to know what God would say about his intention to build a temple for God. At first, Nathan told David it was okay to go ahead because he had not heard from God. However, God spoke to Nathan later and told him that David was not the one who would build him a house. A prophet must consult God before approving anything purportedly coming from God. God would use Nathan to confront David, uphold righteousness, and make his word known throughout David's reign. God uses Nathan to declare the Davidic covenant, if you read 2 Samuel chapter 7, and to rebuke David for his sin with Bathsheba, if you read 2 Samuel chapter 12, and also to talk about Solomon's coronation in 1 Kings chapter 1. So David telling Nathan his plan was to know God's will concerning the project. Why did David want to build a house for God? In our verse, David gives the reason. He is living in a house of cedar, while the ark of God dwells in a tent. The palace of David had been completed and was magnificent for that age. It was made of cedar, which was an expensive material at the time. Cedar trees were well known for their size and strength and had been sent to David by Hiram, the king of Tyre, if you read 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 11. David had built himself a strong, permanent building. The contrast is that the Ark of the Covenant, which symbolized the presence of God among his people, like the tabernacle in the church, was still in a tent. The tent was a temporary structure which the Israelites had traveled with from the wilderness until they reached the promised land. David is uncomfortable seeing the Ark of the Covenant in such a state while he is living in a big house. What do we learn from this verse? First, the attitude of David. He is very conscious that God should be given the most important place. What is our attitude towards God in our lives? Do we give him the pride of place? Second, David is uncomfortable seeing where God's presence was in comparison to his own house. How often do we forget the house of God, focus on our own homes, and care less about the church? And finally, while David thinks about a physical dwelling, later in the passage, God is going to let him know that a spiritual dwelling is even more important than the physical dwelling place. We must make our hearts the true dwelling place of God. And that is how this passage relates to the season we celebrate. Let us make a place in our hearts to welcome Jesus, the Word made flesh, into the temples of our hearts. Lord, may we make our hearts a dwelling place for you. Amen. I wish you all a Merry Christmas and the joy of the season.